The medical bay smelled like copper and ozone, which Ethan had learned meant something was bleeding and something else was about to explode. Neither was ideal in a combat situation, but after 8 years as a field medic, he'd stopped expecting ideal. The ceiling groaned above him, debris shifting in ways that suggested the structural integrity of this particular section of ruined research station was more theoretical than actual. Somewhere above, Kresh soldiers were methodically searching through the wreckage, their chittering communication sounds carrying through the twisted metal like insects in walls. Ethan pressed himself against the remains of a medical cabinet, checking his supplies with the grim efficiency of someone doing inventory at his own funeral. 3 trauma packs, 2 coagulant injectors, 1 very optimistic roll of gauze, and his sidearm with exactly 8 rounds. The math on survival wasn't looking great. His comm unit crackled with static. He'd tried raising his squad 6 times in the last hour, got nothing but electromagnetic interference from whatever the Kresh had done to the station's systems when they overran it. For all he knew, he was the only human left alive in a 100-kilometer radius. Well, he muttered to himself, at least I won't have to file paperwork about this disaster. Dark humor. It was either that or scream, and screaming attracted attention from things with too many limbs and a documented enthusiasm for human vivisection. Movement in the adjacent chamber made him freeze. Not the heavy, armored footfalls of Kresh soldiers, but something lighter, more deliberate. He drew his sidearm with his right hand while his left grabbed the nearest trauma pack, because if something was going to kill him, it would at least have to do it while he was prepared to render medical assistance. The contradiction made him want to laugh, which was probably a sign he'd been in combat zones too long. He moved to the doorway, keeping low, and peered through the gap in the collapsed wall. The warrior was sprawled across what used to be a research table, now just twisted metal and shattered screens. Even injured and semi-conscious, she was unmistakably Talarin. Those distinctive long ears that swept back from her skull, currently pressed flat in pain, marked her species as clearly as a uniform. Her combat armor was the gray-blue of Talarin military, standard issue for their shock troops, but it was cracked across the chest and left side, leaking the biogel that regulated their body temperature in hostile environments. Blood darker than human blood, with a faint purple tint, seeped from multiple wounds across her arm and torso. Her weapon, some kind of plasma rifle Ethan vaguely recognized from joint operation briefings, was still gripped in her right hand despite the fact that she was clearly in no condition to use it. Her eyes opened as he approached, silver with those unsettling vertical pupils that made Talarin look perpetually predatory. They fixed on him with an intensity that made him stop moving, his hands automatically going to a non-threatening position. "Easy," he said in English, then switched to the handful of Talarin words he'd picked up. "Rishkai, friendly, human medic." Her eyes tracked him as he moved closer, her breathing shallow and rapid in that way that said shock was setting in. Talarin physiology was close enough to human that he could recognize the signs: dilated pupils, rapid pulse visible in the throat, that particular stillness that meant the body was starting to shut down non-essential systems. "I'm going to help you," he said, keeping his voice level and calm. "Need to check your injuries." "Yes." She tried to speak, but it came out as a rasp. Her lips moved, forming words he couldn't hear. He leaned closer, and she managed to force sound through her damaged throat. Serith'va. A name. She was giving him her name, which his brief cultural training suggested was significant for Talarin, though he couldn't remember the exact protocol. He filed it away and focused on the immediate problem of keeping her alive. "Ethan," he offered in return, settling beside her and pulling out his medical scanner. "Combat medic, Terran Alliance 4th Fleet. You're going to be fine, Serith'va, but I need you to stay still while I work." The scanner confirmed what his eyes had already told him: multiple lacerations, possible internal bleeding, severe trauma to the left side, shock setting in. The good news was none of it was immediately fatal if he worked fast. The bad news was he'd never actually treated a Talaran in field conditions before. Just simulations and one very awkward training session with a Talaran medical officer who'd clearly resented having to teach humans about their anatomy. He grabbed the universal coagulant from his pack, one of the few medical innovations that worked across most carbon-based species, thank God for small miracles, and prepped the injector. "This is going to hurt," he warned her. "Your species processes pain differently than mine, but the coagulant still burns like hell according to every Talaran I've asked. Ready?" She gave a single sharp nod, her jaw clenching in anticipation. He pressed the injector to her neck, where the major artery pulsed beneath the skin and triggered it. The coagulant hissed into her bloodstream, and he watched her entire body go rigid, every muscle locking up against the pain. But she didn't make a sound. Not a gasp, not a whimper, nothing. Just that terrible stillness while her body screamed silently. Talaran discipline, he thought. They were trained from childhood to endure pain without showing it, to treat their own bodies as weapons that should function regardless of damage. Effective for producing soldiers. Absolutely brutal as a way to live. The coagulant did its job, the worst of the bleeding slowing to manageable levels. But she still had shrapnel embedded in her arm and side, and removing it was going to require more than just chemical intervention. "I need to extract the shrapnel," he told her, pulling out his surgical kit. "It's going to require contact, physical contact. Is that," he struggled to remember the protocol, "is that permitted?" Her silver eyes fixed on him with an expression he couldn't read. Talaran faces were hard for humans to parse. The bone structure was similar enough to be familiar, but different enough to make all the micro-expressions wrong. "Necessary," she rasped. "Proceed." Professional, clinical. Exactly what he'd expect from a species that treated emotions like system malfunctions. Ethan positioned his portable light to give him the best view of the injuries and began the delicate work of removing metal from flesh. His hands were steady. They always were during actual medical work. It was only before and after that they shook, as he used the extraction forceps to grip the first piece of shrapnel. "Breathe," he told her, though he wasn't sure Talaran actually needed that reminder. "On 3. 1, 2, he pulled on 2, an old medic trick because patients always tensed on 3. The shrapnel came free with a sound like tearing fabric, and he saw her hand clench around her weapon hard enough that the metal creaked. But still, no sound. "You're tougher than most humans I've treated," he said, moving to the next piece. "We scream. Lot of screaming in human medicine. Sometimes from the patients, sometimes from the medics when things go really wrong." He was babbling, filling the silence with words because silence in medicine meant he was thinking too hard about what he was doing, and thinking too hard led to hesitation, and hesitation killed people. Another piece of shrapnel extracted. Then another. He worked with methodical care, cleaning each wound as he went, applying coagulant gel to the deeper lacerations. Her blood was cooling on his hands, that strange purple-dark color that marked her as fundamentally other despite the similarities. "Almost done with the arm," he said. "The torso wounds are going to be more complicated. Some of that shrapnel is close to what I think are major organs, and I'm going to be honest with you. My knowledge of Talaran anatomy is mostly theoretical. I've studied the diagrams, but I've never actually. You are doing well." Her voice was stronger now, the coagulant giving her system enough stability to function. "I am alive. Therefore, your knowledge is sufficient." "That's one way to measure success," Ethan muttered, extracting another piece of metal. "I prefer my patients to stay alive long-term, not just technically alive for the next 10 minutes. Talaran do not require long-term survival to measure success. We require victory." "Yeah, well, I'm human. We're sentimental about keeping people breathing." He finished with her arm and moved to assess the torso wounds. This was going to require removing part of her armor, which was its own challenge. Talarin bioarmor was partially integrated with their skin through neural connections he didn't fully understand. Removing it wrong could cause additional trauma. "I need your help with the armor," he said. "The biolocks. I can't open them from outside." She looked down at the damaged plates, and for the first time he saw something like hesitation in her expression. Her hand moved to the release mechanism, hovered there, then dropped back to her side. "The armor is," she stopped, seemed to struggle with the words. "It is our second skin, our protection. To remove it is to be vulnerable." "You're already vulnerable," Ethan said gently. "You're injured, separated from your unit, trapped in hostile territory. The armor isn't protecting you anymore. It's trapping the wounds and preventing treatment." Her silver eyes met his, and he saw something in them that surprised him. Not anger or fear, but something closer to pleading, as if she was asking him to understand something she couldn't articulate. "I'll be careful," he promised. "I'll protect you while you're vulnerable. That's my job." She studied his face for a long moment, then slowly, reluctantly, triggered the biolocks. The armor plates separated with a hiss of depressurizing gel, pulling away from skin that was marked with scars. Ritual patterns, he realized, swirling designs that looked both decorative and purposeful. Beneath the armor, she was as vulnerable as any being he'd ever treated. Just skin and muscle, and the fragility of biology pretending to be strong. He began working on the torso wounds, his hands necessarily gentle as he probed the injuries. She watched his face instead of his hands, her gaze intense and unwavering. It made him self-conscious, aware that his concentration face probably looked strange to alien eyes. "You can look away," he suggested. "Most people prefer not to watch me dig around in their insides. I am not most people, and you are not most medics." "What makes you say that?" "Most medics do not risk themselves for wounded Talarin. Our alliance with humanity is one of necessity, not affection. We are tools to you as you are tools to us." Ethan paused in his work, looking up at her. "Is that what you think? That I'm only helping you because of political necessity? Why else would you help? We are not your people. We do not share your values or your culture. We are cold to you, difficult to understand. Even your military command finds us." She searched for the word. "Unsettling." "Yeah, well, you're also bleeding out in front of me and I'm a medic. That's reason enough." He returned to extracting shrapnel, his voice matter of fact. "I don't need to understand your culture or find you comfortable to know that leaving someone to die when I can help is wrong. That's not politics, that's just being human." She was silent for several heartbeats. Then, "Your species is strange. We get that a lot." He was working on a particularly deep wound near what he hoped wasn't a vital organ when the building shook. Dust rained from the ceiling, and somewhere above them something collapsed with a sound like thunder. Serith'va tried to sit up, her hand reaching for her weapon. "The creche, they are close." "Yeah, I noticed." Ethan pressed her back down, not gently. "And you're going to stay exactly where you are until I'm done, or you'll bleed out in the next 10 minutes. Your choice, die fighting or live to fight later." Her jaw clenched, muscles tensing against his hand where it pressed on her shoulder. For a moment he thought she might push him away, might choose death in combat over the indignity of medical treatment. Then she subsided, settling back against the broken table. "Finish quickly." "Working on it." But his hands moved a little faster anyway. The next piece of shrapnel was lodged deeper than Ethan liked, close enough to what his scanner identified as a major blood vessel that one wrong move could turn a survivable injury into a fatal hemorrhage. His hands, which had been steady through countless field surgeries, suddenly felt the weight of what he was doing. This wasn't just another wounded soldier. This was a Talarin warrior, a member of a species that terrified half the human military, whose culture he barely understood, whose physiology was alien enough that he was essentially improvising based on educated guesses and desperate hope. "Talk to me," he said, keeping his voice calm. "Tell me about your unit. Where were you stationed before the ambush?" Serith'va's eyes narrowed slightly, confusion, maybe, or suspicion. "Why do you wish to know?" Because I need you conscious and responsive, and the best way to ensure that is to keep you talking. Also because I'm about to do something that's going to hurt, and conversation is a good distraction from pain. Talarin do not require distraction from pain. Humor me, I'm human, we like talking. She was silent for a moment, then spoke. My unit was assigned to the northern defense perimeter. 12 warriors, all veterans of the Caldros campaign. We held the line for 6 hours against Kresh assault forces. Her voice carried a note of pride. None of my warriors fell. Until the ambush. Until the betrayal. Her tone went cold. Someone compromised our position, gave the Kresh our patrol routes, our defensive positions. When they came with precision, targeted strikes on our weak points. Ethan carefully maneuvered his extraction forceps around the shrapnel, feeling for the angle that would let him remove it without tearing the blood vessel. You think there's a traitor? I know there is a traitor. No one survives 12 Kresh ambush teams by luck. They had intelligence, perfect intelligence. Her hand clenched around her weapon again. When I return, I will find who sold my warriors' lives. And I will ensure they understand the cost of betrayal. The quiet fury in her voice made Ethan glad he wasn't whoever had crossed her. He'd heard stories about Talarin justice, swift, brutal, and absolute. Hold still, he warned, then extracted the shrapnel in one smooth motion. Blood welled up immediately, darker than it should be, and he had to work fast to pack the wound with coagulant gel before the bleeding got out of control. His fingers pressed into her skin, feeling the alien coolness of her, the slight texture like very fine scales that human eyes couldn't see but human touch could detect. She went rigid beneath his hands, but still made no sound. You're good at this, Ethan said, applying pressure to the wound. The not screaming thing. Most humans would be cursing my ancestry by now. Pain is information. It tells us where damage exists so we can compensate. Reacting to pain with noise is wasteful. That's one perspective. Personally, I find screaming very cathartic. The bleeding was slowing. Good. He grabbed a sterile pad and began securing it in place. Although I admit it's less helpful in combat situations, tends to give away your position. You make jokes during medical procedures. It's either that or think too hard about what I'm doing, and thinking too hard makes my hands shake. The jokes keep me focused. That is, she paused, searching for words, inefficient. Welcome to humanity. We're spectacularly inefficient at almost everything except finding new ways to survive impossible situations. He moved to the next wound, this one less severe but positioned awkwardly across her ribs. Hold your breath for a second. This is going to pull. She obeyed, and he extracted the shrapnel quickly, cleaning and packing the wound before she could exhale. 3 more pieces to go, each one a delicate operation in alien flesh. Above them, the sounds of searching had grown closer. Kresh communication clicks echoed through the corridors, accompanied by the distinctive hum of their scanning equipment. They were being methodical, sweeping every chamber, leaving nothing unchecked. They will find us, Serith'va said quietly. You should leave while you can. I will delay them. Yeah, that's not happening. Ethan extracted another piece of shrapnel, smaller this time. I didn't spend the last 20 minutes keeping you alive just to leave you here as Kresh bait. I am a warrior. Sacrifice is my purpose. And I'm a medic. Keeping people alive is my purpose. Looks like we're at an impasse. He cleaned the wound, his movements practiced and efficient. Besides, you're my ticket out of here. I don't speak Talarin military codes, don't know the safe routes through this sector, and I'm pretty sure if I try to navigate alone, I'll walk straight into a Kresh patrol. You know this station. You know the protocols. We're better off together. You would trust a Talarin to guide you. I'm trusting a Talarin to let me save her life. Seems like we're past the trust issues at this point. He finished with the torso wounds and sat back, assessing his work. Not perfect, field medicine never was, but good enough. She'd live, assuming they could avoid the Kresh long enough for the coagulant to fully stabilize her system. I need to bandage the arm properly, he said, pulling out his roll of gauze. The coagulant will hold, but compression bandaging will help prevent reopening if you have to move quickly. She nodded, extending her injured arm toward him. Ethan began wrapping the bandage with the methodical care that had kept dozens of soldiers from bleeding out over his 8 years of service. The gauze went around her bicep, across the worst of the lacerations, tight enough to provide support but not so tight it would restrict circulation. His fingers brushed her skin with each pass of the fabric, and he found himself noting details he shouldn't be noticing. The way her muscle tone suggested strength that exceeded human norms. The pattern of scars that marked her as a veteran of conflicts he couldn't imagine. The slight tremor in her arm that she was trying to suppress, not from pain, he thought, but from something else. "You're shaking," he said quietly. "The shock. My body is responding to trauma. That's not shock shaking, that's adrenaline crash mixed with something else." He paused in his wrapping, looking at her face. "When's the last time someone touched you? I mean really touched you, not in combat." Her silver eyes widened slightly, the first sign of genuine surprise he'd seen from her. "That is not a relevant question. It's completely relevant. Your species doesn't do physical contact, right? I remember that from the briefings. No handshakes, no casual touch, everything maintained at arm's length unless you're actively fighting. Physical contact is weakness. It creates dependency, emotional vulnerability. Warriors must be self-sufficient. That's a hell of a way to live." Ethan continued wrapping the bandage, his voice gentle. "Humans need touch. It's how we bond, how we communicate comfort and trust. Studies show that human infants die without it, even if all their other needs are met. We're wired for connection. Talaran are wired for survival. Are they mutually exclusive?" She didn't answer, but he saw something flicker across her face. Uncertainty, maybe, or the beginning of a question she didn't know how to ask. He was nearly done with the bandaging, his fingers working through the familiar motions when it happened. Her hand shot up and grabbed his, not violently, not aggressively, but with desperate firmness. Her fingers wrapped around his, gripping with a strength that should have hurt but somehow didn't, and they both froze. Complete stillness. His hands on her arm, her hand on his, the bandage half-wrapped and forgotten. The sounds of the creche searching above them faded into background noise, meaningless compared to this moment. Her eyes were wide, her breathing rapid and shallow. She looked as shocked by her own action as he was, like she'd moved without conscious thought and was only now realizing what she'd done. Ethan's medical training screamed at him, "Pull away. You're violating protocol. Physical contact with Talaran outside of medical necessity is forbidden. You're crossing cultural boundaries you don't understand." This could be considered assault in her culture. Move, now. But he didn't move, because what he saw in her eyes wasn't anger or violation or disgust. It was raw, unfiltered vulnerability so intense it hurt to witness. Like watching someone's armor crack open to reveal the fragile person underneath, the one who'd been hidden for so long they'd almost forgotten they existed. She was trembling, not from shock or adrenaline or pain, but from this, from the contact, from the touch, from feeling another being's warmth against her skin in a way that had nothing to do with violence or medical procedure. "Serith'va," he said quietly, carefully, giving her every opportunity to pull away. "Are you okay? Do you want me to stop?" She didn't pull away. Her grip on his hand tightened slightly, her thumb moving against his palm in what might have been unconscious exploration or might have been deliberate. The movement was small, tentative, like someone testing the reality of something they'd only imagined. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "I have never," she stopped, started again in her own language, then forced the words into English. "I have never felt safe." The confession broke something in Ethan's chest, cracked open all the careful emotional distance he'd built over 8 years of watching people die. He'd seen soldiers broken by combat, seen civilians destroyed by war, seen every variation of human suffering that conflict could produce. But he'd never seen this kind of deprivation. This fundamental lack of something so basic that humans took it for granted. "You're safe now," he heard himself say, his voice rough with emotion he hadn't meant to show. "I've got you. You don't have to be strong alone." Her eyes filled with moisture, tears, he realized with shock, because he hadn't known Talarin could cry. The tears didn't fall, held back by years of training and discipline that said showing emotion was weakness, but they were there, making her silver eyes shimmer in the dim light. "We are raised in isolation," she said, the words tumbling out like a confession she'd held back her entire life. "From childhood, we are taught that touch is vulnerability, that connection makes warriors unreliable. We train alone, fight alone, die alone. It is the Talarin way, it makes us strong." "Does it?" Ethan asked quietly. "Or does it just make you alone?" "I do not know." Her voice cracked on the admission. "I have never known anything else." Until she looked down at their joined hands. "Until this moment. Until you touched me with gentleness instead of violence and I felt what? Everything." The word came out broken. "I felt everything I have been trained not to feel. Safety, trust, the possibility that vulnerability is not the same as weakness." Her thumb moved against his palm again, that small tentative touch. "I do not know what to do with these feelings." Ethan made a decision. Moving slowly, telegraphing every motion, he shifted his free hand to continue wrapping the bandage one-handed. It was awkward, inefficient, completely contrary to proper medical procedure. But he didn't let go of her hand. She watched him work, something like wonder dawning in her expression as she realized what he was doing. He was continuing the treatment while maintaining the contact, refusing to make her choose between medical care and this unexpected moment of connection. "In human medicine," he said as he wrapped gauze with one hand, "we call this bedside manner. The technical skill is important, but so is the comfort, the reassurance. We touch patients not just to treat them, but to remind them they're not alone in their suffering. That is inefficient. That's human." He secured the bandage with medical tape, still holding her hand with his other. "We're messy and emotional, and we need each other in ways that probably don't make sense to your culture, but it works for us. It keeps us sane in an insane universe. I am beginning to understand why your species confuses mine. The feeling is mutual." He finished the bandaging and should have pulled away, should have released her hand and returned to professional distance. But he didn't. He sat there in the ruins, holding hands with an alien warrior while the Kresh hunted them, and it felt like the most important thing he'd done in years. Serith'va's breathing had steadied, synchronized with his without either of them consciously trying. Her grip on his hand remained firm but had lost that desperate edge, settling into something more like trust. "My full name," she said quietly, "is Serith'va of the Broken Spear clan. Among Talarin, names are only shared between warriors who have saved each other's lives or between family." She paused. "You have saved my life, Ethan Rivers. By our customs we are now bonded." "Bonded how?" "I do not know the human word. It is," she searched for translation, "a connection that transcends alliance. You are responsible for my life and I for yours. Our fates are linked until one of us falls in battle or the bond is formally dissolved." That seems like a significant commitment for bandaging some wounds. "It is not the wounds. It is the manner of healing." Her silver eyes held his. "You did not treat me as a tool or an ally of convenience. You treated me as someone worth saving for their own sake. That is rare in my experience. That is worth bonding over." Another explosion rocked the building, closer this time. Dust and debris rained down and a crack appeared in the ceiling above them, growing wider with each tremor. "We need to move," Ethan said, but he still didn't release her hand. "Yes." Serith'va tried to stand, and this time he helped her, his arm going around her waist to support her weight as she got her feet under her. She was taller than him by several inches, built for strength and speed in ways human biology hadn't prioritized. They stood there for a moment, her leaning against him, his arms supporting her, their hands still clasped. both of them acutely aware they were touching in multiple places, maintaining contact that served no medical purpose, crossing boundaries neither of their cultures would approve of. "Your people will question this," she said quietly, "when they learn of our contact." "Yeah, probably. Talaran freak out most humans. Too disciplined, too cold, too other. Command barely trusts you as allies." He looked up at her. "What about your people? What will they do when they find out you let a human touch you?" "They will demand explanation. They will say I have been compromised, made weak, lost the discipline that defines our warriors." Her expression hardened. "They will see this as failure. And what do you see it as?" She looked down at their joined hands, then back at his face. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but certain. "I see it as the first time in my life I have felt like more than a weapon. The first time someone has touched me, and I did not feel threatened or violated or reduced to my function." A small smile crossed her face, uncertain and unpracticed but genuine. "I see it as something worth defending. Even if it costs you. Especially if it costs me. What use is survival if I am merely surviving? If I never feel safe, never trust, never allow myself the vulnerability of connection?" Her grip on his hand tightened. "You showed me there is more to existence than discipline and duty. I will not forget. I will endeavor not to bleed on you further." "Appreciate it." They moved toward the exit, Serith'va limping but mobile, Ethan staying close enough to support her if needed. The corridor beyond was dark, lit only by emergency lighting that flickered unreliably. Smoke hung in the air, making every breath taste like burning metal. "This way," Serith'va said, gesturing left. "There is a maintenance tunnel 2 corridors over. It connects to the evacuation system. If the Kresh have not discovered it, we can use it to reach the surface. And if they have discovered it, then we fight our way through." She glanced at him. "You are trained in combat, yes, not merely medicine." "Every medic is a soldier first. We just prefer to heal rather than kill." He checked his sidearm. "But I know how to shoot when I need to." They moved through the ruined station, keeping to shadows, avoiding the main corridors where Kresh patrols were most likely. Twice they heard soldiers pass nearby and had to freeze, pressing against walls, barely breathing. Each time, Serith'va's hand found his in the darkness, that small contact grounding them both. The maintenance tunnel entrance was exactly where she'd said, hidden behind a collapsed wall section that made it look inaccessible. Together they moved the debris, revealing a narrow passage that descended into darkness. "After you," Ethan said. "You trust me to lead. You haven't killed me yet. That's a pretty good track record for this mission." That small smile again, still uncertain but lasting longer this time. "Your species' humor is strange. You're not the first to mention it." They descended into the tunnel, leaving the ruined medical bay behind. As they moved through darkness, guided only by Ethan's tactical light and Serith'va's knowledge of the station, he found himself thinking about what had happened. A Talaran warrior had grabbed his hand, had held on, had confessed vulnerability and fear and need, had smiled, and he'd let her. More than that, he'd wanted her too. Whatever they'd started in that medical bay, whatever bond had formed between them in that moment of contact, it was dangerous and unprecedented and absolutely forbidden by both their worlds. But as Serith'va led him through the darkness, occasionally reaching back to ensure he was still there, her hand finding his in the shadows, Ethan realized he didn't care about forbidden. He cared about the warrior who'd spent her entire life believing touch was weakness, who'd never felt safe, who'd grabbed his hand like a drowning person grabbing a lifeline. And if keeping her safe meant defying protocols and cultures and the entire political structure of the human Talaran alliance, then that's what he'd do. Because that's what humans did. They connected. They cared. They chose people over protocol every single time. Even when those people had silver eyes and long ears and came from a culture that would never understand. Especially then. The maintenance tunnel was claustrophobic in ways that made Ethan's skin crawl. Low ceilings, narrow walls, The constant drip of condensation from pipes overhead that mixed with blood and created small rust-colored puddles on the metal floor. His tactical light cut through the darkness in a narrow beam that somehow made the shadows worse. Serith'va moved ahead of him with the careful precision of someone navigating through pain. Her left side was clearly compromised. He could see the slight hitch in her gait, the way she favored her right leg, the careful breathing that said her ribs were hurting with every step. But she didn't complain, didn't slow, didn't acknowledge the discomfort, Talarin discipline, or Talarin stubbornness. Ethan was starting to suspect they were the same thing. How much further? He asked, keeping his voice low. Sound carried in these tunnels in unpredictable ways. 1/2 kilometer to the primary junction. From there, we can access the evacuation shafts. She paused at an intersection, checking for movement before gesturing him forward. The creche may have posted guards at the junction. We should prepare for combat. Define prepare for combat. When one of us is bleeding through her bandages and the other has 8 bullets. I have 17 plasma charges remaining. Combined with your 8 rounds, that gives us 25 chances to kill the enemy before we die. She said it so matter-of-factly that it took Ethan a moment to process. You have a really optimistic definition of prepared. I have a realistic assessment of our tactical situation. Optimism is inefficient. They continued through the tunnel, and Ethan found himself watching the set of her shoulders, the way she moved despite the pain. She'd been trained to treat her body as a weapon to ignore damage until the mission was complete. It was effective. It was also deeply sad. "Can I ask you something?" he said after several minutes of silence. "You may ask. I will decide if I answer. When's the last time you felt safe? Before today, I mean." Serith'va was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, "I do not have a memory of feeling safe. Not in childhood, not in training, not in any moment of my life. Nothing, not even as a child." Talarin children are separated from their parents at 3 cycles, approximately 4 human years. We are raised in training collectives where emotional attachment is discouraged. Safety is not a concept we learn, only survival, discipline, and duty. Ethan felt something twist in his chest. I can't imagine growing up like that. What is human childhood like? Messy, loud, full of affection and chaos and learning through mistakes. He thought about his own childhood, which had been pretty standard for a military kid. My mom used to hug me every night before bed, tell me she loved me. My dad taught me to throw a baseball and told terrible jokes. I had friends, got into fights, scraped my knees and cried and was comforted. It was normal, I guess. You were permitted to cry. Encouraged, even. Humans believe expressing emotion is healthy. Bottling things up leads to psychological problems. Talarin believe expressing emotion leads to weakness. That enduring alone builds strength. Does it build strength, I mean? She stopped walking, turned to face him in the narrow tunnel. In the beam of his tactical light, her silver eyes were almost luminous. I do not know anymore. I thought I was strong because I needed nothing, felt nothing, connected to nothing. But when you touched my hand, she paused, struggling with words. I did not feel weak. I felt complete. As if there was a part of me missing that I never knew existed. And in that moment of contact, I found it. Ethan stepped closer, close enough that he could see the rapid pulse in her throat, the way her breathing had quickened. What part? The part that wants to be more than a weapon. The part that craves gentleness and safety and the touch of another being who sees me as a person, not a tool. Her hand moved, tentative and uncertain, reaching toward him. Am I permitted to? He took her hand before she could finish the question, their fingers intertwining in the darkness. Her skin was cool against his, that faint scale texture subtle under his palm, and he felt her entire body relax at the contact. You don't need permission, he said quietly. Not from me. If you want to touch to connect, that's your choice. I'm just honored you're choosing to do it with me. Why are you honored? I am alien to you, difficult to understand. My people are cold and distant. We do not integrate well with humans. Maybe that's exactly why. Because you're choosing to be vulnerable with someone from a species you don't fully understand, trusting me despite every cultural instinct telling you not to. He squeezed her hand gently. That takes incredible courage, Serith'va. It feels more like surrender than courage. Sometimes they're the same thing. They stood there in the maintenance tunnel, hands clasped, while somewhere above them the creche continued their methodical search. It was insane, tactically unsound, completely counter to every survival instinct Ethan had developed in 8 years of combat medicine. But it also felt more real than anything he'd experienced in those 8 years. A sound echoed through the tunnel, footsteps, multiple sets, the distinctive chittering of creche communication. Serith'va's grip on his hand tightened, then released as she raised her plasma rifle. "Behind the junction box," she whispered, gesturing to a cluster of industrial equipment that would provide minimal cover. 3 soldiers, possibly 4, standard patrol formation. They pressed themselves into the shadows, weapons ready. Ethan's heart hammered against his ribs, adrenaline flooding his system. He'd been in firefights before, but usually as support, dragging wounded soldiers to safety while others did the shooting. This was different. This was him and one injured Talarin against an unknown number of creche in close quarters. The footsteps grew closer. Ethan could see movement in the darkness ahead, the faint bioluminescence that creche exoskeletons gave off, like deep-sea creatures adapted for environments without light. Serith'va's hand found his in the darkness, squeezed once, a gesture that might have meant be ready, or might have meant thank you for earlier, or might have meant something neither of them had words for. Then she released him and steadied her rifle. The first creche soldier rounded the corner, its compound eyes scanning the tunnel with alien precision. Serith'va's plasma rifle hummed once, a bolt of superheated energy striking center mass. The soldier dropped without a sound, its chitinous armor smoking. Chaos erupted. 3 more creche appeared, returning fire with their own weapons. Energy bolts scorched the walls, filled the air with the smell of burning metal. Ethan fired twice, his rounds punching through armor with satisfying accuracy. 1 creche fell, then another. But the 4th was advancing, its weapon tracking towards Serith'va, and she was out of position, still recovering from the recoil of her last shot. Ethan moved without thinking, stepping between her and the creche, firing his remaining rounds. The first 3 missed in the chaos. The 4th caught the creche in what passed for a throat, dropping it mid-stride. Silence fell, broken only by their heavy breathing and the crackle of energy weapons cooling. "That was tactically unsound," Serith'va said, her voice slightly unsteady. "You placed yourself in danger to protect me." "Yeah, well, we're bonded, remember. Your life is my responsibility." Ethan checked his weapon, empty, as he'd known it would be. "Looks like I'm down to harsh language and medical supplies for the rest of this mission." She stared at him, something working behind those silver eyes that he couldn't quite read. Then she did something that shocked him more than the firefight had. She reached out and touched his face. Her palm rested against his cheek, cool and gentle, her long fingers tracing the line of his jaw with exploratory care. She was trembling again, but this time it wasn't from shock or pain. It was from the sheer audacity of what she was doing, touching not from necessity, not from accident, but from choice. "You risked yourself," she said quietly. "For me. Not for the Alliance, not for tactical advantage, for me." That's what people do when they care about each other. I have never had anyone care about me like this. Never had anyone place my life above their own. Her thumb brushed across his cheekbone, learning the topography of human features. "I do not know how to reciprocate this feeling." "You're touching me," Ethan said, his own hand coming up to cover hers where it rested on his face. "You're choosing vulnerability over discipline. That's reciprocation enough." "Is it?" "Because I feel as though I am taking more than I give. You save my life, protect me in combat, offer comfort I do not deserve." "Stop," he said it gently but firmly. "You deserve comfort, Serith'va. You deserve safety and touch and connection. The fact that your culture taught you otherwise doesn't make it true. Tears welled in her eyes again, and this time one escaped, tracking down her cheek. He watched it fall, this impossible thing, a Talarin warrior crying, and felt something fundamental shift in his understanding of her species. They weren't cold. They were conditioned, trained from childhood to suppress every natural need for connection and comfort, taught to see vulnerability as weakness until they believed it themselves. But underneath all that conditioning was this: a being who wanted exactly what every human wanted, to be seen, valued, protected, to feel safe in another's presence. "We should keep moving," Serith'va said, but she didn't lower her hand from his face. "Yeah, we should." He didn't move either. They stood there for another heartbeat, then two, frozen in this moment of contact while the tactical situation demanded they flee. Finally, reluctantly, she lowered her hand and they continued through the tunnel. But everything had changed. Every few meters her hand would brush his in the darkness. Deliberately, Ethan thought, not accidentally. Small touches that served no purpose except to maintain connection, to remind herself this was real, that she was permitted to want this. And each time, Ethan's hand would find hers in response, a silent confirmation that yes, this was real, and yes, she was permitted. The primary junction was a vast chamber where multiple tunnels converged, lit by emergency lighting that cast everything in sickly green. Evacuation shafts lined the far wall, their doors sealed but functional according to the status displays. "That one," Serith'va indicated a shaft on the left. "It will take us to the surface 3 kilometers from the main Kresh encampment. We can signal for extraction from there." They crossed the junction quickly, constantly scanning for more patrols. Ethan's empty weapon felt useless in his hands, but he kept it ready anyway. Sometimes the appearance of being armed was enough. Serith'va accessed the shaft controls, her fingers moving across the interface with practiced ease. The door hissed open, revealing a vertical tunnel that disappeared upward into darkness. "There are emergency rungs," she said. "Can you climb in your condition? I'm not the one who got perforated by shrapnel. Can you climb in your condition?" "I am Talarin, I can climb." "That's not an answer." She turned to face him, and in the green emergency lighting, her expression was almost vulnerable. "I can climb if you are with me. I do not wish to do this alone." "Then you won't have to." Ethan checked the shaft, calculating the climb. Maybe 30 meters to the surface, doable even with her injuries. "I'll go first in case you slip. I can catch you." "You cannot catch me. I outweigh you by at least 20 kilos. Then I'll break your fall and we'll both die heroically. It'll be very romantic." That small smile again, lasting a full second this time. "Your species' concept of romance is deeply flawed." "You're not wrong." He started climbing, the metal rungs cold under his hands, his medical pack bouncing against his back with each movement. Above him, he could hear Serith'va following, her breathing labored but steady. They climbed in silence, focusing on the rhythm of movement, hand over hand, foot after foot, the slow ascent toward freedom. Halfway up, Ethan heard Serith'va's breathing change, becoming more ragged, and he paused. "You okay up there?" "The wound's pulling. Pain is significant." "Need to stop and rest." "No, the Kresh may discover the junction. We must continue." They kept climbing, but Ethan could hear the strain in her breathing, could imagine the agony of torn flesh pulling with each movement. The coagulant would hold, but the pain would be intense. "Talk to me," he said. "About anything. Distraction helps." "What should I speak of?" "Tell me about your clan, the Broken Spear. Where does the name come from?" Silence for several rungs then. "A battle, 6 generations past. My ancestors held a critical position against impossible odds. They broke their spears fighting, used the shattered weapons to continue combat. None survived, but their sacrifice allowed the fleet to escape. We bear the name to remember that victory sometimes requires breaking." "That's beautiful and depressing in equal measure." "It is Talarin." They climbed higher, the surface growing closer. Ethan could feel cooler air now, smell something other than recycled station atmosphere. "When we reach the surface," Serith'va said quietly, "when we signal for extraction, what happens to us?" "What do you mean?" "This, what we have shared. The touching, the vulnerability. When we return to our units, to our separate commands, does it end?" Ethan stopped climbing, looking up through the darkness toward where he knew she was. "Do you want it to end?" "No, but I do not know if what I want is relevant. Our peoples do not understand connection like this. They will see it as compromise, as weakness. They will attempt to separate us." "Let them try." The words came out more fierce than he intended. "I don't care what command thinks or what your superiors say or what cultural protocols we're violating. What happened between us, that's real. That matters. And I'm not giving it up just because it makes people uncomfortable. You would defy your command structure for this, for me." In a heartbeat, he resumed climbing. "I've spent 8 years watching people die, Serith'va. Watching connections break and love end and everything good in the universe get ground up by war. If I've found something worth protecting, something that makes this endless conflict feel like it has meaning, yeah, I'll defy orders for that." Gladly, he heard something that might have been a sob, quickly suppressed. "I have never had anyone speak of me like this, as if I am worth defiance and risk." "Then everyone you've known has been an idiot. You are strange, Ethan Rivers. You're not the first person to mention it." They reached the surface as twin suns were setting over Kesvar, painting the sky in shades of amber and violet. The research station was a smoking ruin behind them, Kresh forces still visible in the distance conducting their methodical search. Ethan pulled Serith'va up the last few rungs and they collapsed together on the rocky ground, breathing hard, alive against all reasonable odds. "We made it," he said, slightly disbelieving. "We did." Serith'va was lying on her back, staring up at the alien sky. "I should signal for extraction." "Yeah, you should." Neither of them moved. Instead, slowly, carefully, the extraction ships descended like metallic angels, their engines kicking up dust that turned the sunset into a haze of copper and gold. 2 ships, one human, one Talaran, approaching from different vectors with the practiced coordination of allies who didn't quite trust each other. Serith'va's hand tightened around Ethan's. "They are here." "Yeah." He didn't let go. "We knew they would be. Once we board, this becomes difficult. Command will separate us for debriefing. They will ask questions." "Let them ask." The ships settled onto the rocky ground with synchronized precision, hatches hissing open to reveal medical teams and armed escorts. Ethan recognized Lieutenant Chen from his unit, her expression shifting from relief to confusion as she took in the scene, her medic sitting on the ground holding hands with a Talaran warrior. "Rivers," Chen jogged over, her medical scanner already active. "Thank God you're alive. We've been searching for survivors for 6 hours." Her eyes flicked to Serith'va, to their joined hands, back to Ethan's face. "What's your status?" "Ambulatory, uninjured, but my patient needs immediate evac. Multiple shrapnel wounds, significant blood loss, possible internal trauma." He still didn't release Serith'va's hand. "She's stable for now, but she needs a proper medical facility." From the Talaran ship, 3 warriors emerged, 2 soldiers, and what appeared to be a medical officer based on the equipment they carried. They approached with that distinctive Talaran efficiency, their long ears swept back in formal positioning. The medical officer, older, with ritual scars that marked decades of service, stopped several meters away, their silver eyes taking in Serith'va's condition and the human medic still holding her hand. "Serith'va of the Broken Spear clan," the officer said in Talaran, which Ethan's limited understanding barely followed. "You live. This is unexpected. I was aided by the human medic." Serith'va's voice had shifted, becoming more formal, but she still hadn't released Ethan's hand. "He preserved my life when I would have fallen. Then we are in his debt." The medical officer's gaze shifted to their joined hands. "You may release him now. We will provide care." "I do not wish to release him." The silence that fell was absolute. Lieutenant Chen stared. The Talarin warriors went completely still, their ears flattening against their skulls in what Ethan's briefings had identified as shock or aggression. The medical officer stepped closer, their voice dropping to something that wasn't quite a whisper but carried a warning. Serith'va, you are in shock. Trauma has compromised your judgment. Release the human and allow us to treat you properly. My judgment is clear. Serith'va sat up slowly, wincing as the movement pulled her wounds, but her grip on Ethan's hand remained firm. This human has shown me something our people have forgotten. He has shown me that vulnerability is not weakness, that connection is not compromise. I will not release him simply because it makes you uncomfortable. This is not about comfort. This is about protocol, about maintaining the discipline that defines our species. Then perhaps our discipline is flawed. Serith'va's voice was quiet but carried absolute conviction. I have spent my entire life alone, believing that isolation made me strong. But in the moments I spent with this human, I felt stronger than I ever have. Not because I needed nothing, but because I allowed myself to need someone and discovered I could trust them with that need. The medical officer turned to Ethan, their expression unreadable. Human, you have provided medical assistance to our warrior. For this, you have our gratitude. But you must understand, physical contact with Talarin outside of medical necessity is forbidden. It creates dependencies that compromise combat effectiveness. With all due respect, Ethan said, keeping his voice level, I think your warrior is plenty combat effective. She killed 3 Kresh soldiers while bleeding from multiple wounds. The hand-holding didn't seem to slow her down. Lieutenant Chen made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. Rivers, what the hell happened down there? I provided medical care to an injured ally, standard protocol. He looked at Serith'va, saw the small smile tugging at her lips. Everything else was her choice. Everything else appears to be a significant cultural violation, the Talarin medical officer said coldly. Serith'va, you will be debriefed. Your actions will be reviewed. If you have been compromised, I have been liberated. Serith'va stood fully now, still holding Ethan's hand, addressing the medical officer with the authority of someone who had nothing left to lose. For the first time in my life, I understand what it means to feel safe, to trust another being completely. If that is compromise, then I choose compromise over the cold isolation we call discipline. You are injured, traumatized. You are not thinking clearly. I am thinking more clearly than I ever have. She turned to Ethan, and in her eyes he saw determination mixed with fear and hope. This human has bonded with me according to our oldest customs. He saved my life, and I claimed him as blood bond. That bond supersedes protocol. It supersedes command structure. By our own laws, what exists between us is sacred and cannot be dissolved by others. The medical officer's ears flattened completely. You claimed a human as blood bond. That ritual is reserved for Talarin. The ritual states warrior who preserves life, not Talarin warrior. I am following our customs exactly. Serith'va's voice carried a note of challenge. Unless you wish to argue that our oldest traditions should be reinterpreted to exclude allies who have proven themselves in blood and sacrifice. Lieutenant Chen had moved closer to Ethan, her voice low. Rivers, do you have any idea what you've gotten yourself into? Not even a little bit, he admitted. But I'm not backing down. This is going to create a diplomatic incident. Probably, still not backing down. Chen studied his face, then glanced at Serith'va, at their still-joined hands, at the way they stood together against the gathering opposition. Something in her expression softened. You really care about her? Yeah, I really do. Even though she's Talarin, even though they're cold and distant and we barely understand them. She's not cold, she's conditioned. There's a difference. Ethan squeezed Serith'va's hand. And I understand her better than I've understood anyone in years. The standoff continued, Talarin and human medical teams uncertain how to proceed, their cultural protocols colliding in ways neither had anticipated. Finally, the Talarin medical officer spoke again, their voice carefully neutral. Serith'va of the Broken Spear clan, you are injured and require treatment. Will you board our ship for proper medical care? Only if Ethan Rivers accompanies me. That is not, he is human. Our medical facilities are not designed. Then I will board the human ship. She looked at Ethan. With your permission. You don't need my permission. But yeah, our medical bay can handle Talarin physiology. I'll oversee your treatment personally. The Talarin medical officer looked between them, clearly struggling with a situation that had no precedent in their rigid cultural framework. Finally, they gestured to the two warriors. Observe. If the human provides inadequate care, you will intervene. And Serith'va, this matter will be reported to your clan elders. They will decide if your claim of blood bond is valid. I welcome their judgment. You may not feel that way once they render it. Serith'va lifted her chin. I have lived my entire life seeking their approval, following every protocol, denying every natural need for connection. If they cannot understand what I have found here, then perhaps their approval is not worth having. The pronouncement hung in the air like a declaration of war. The Talarin medical officer's expression flickered through several emotions too quickly for Ethan to track, finally settling on something that might have been resignation or possibly respect. You have changed, Serith'va. Whether for better or worse remains to be seen. They stepped back. We will await the elders' decision. Until then, you are released to human medical care. The Talarin warriors boarded their ship with formal precision, the ramp closing behind them. The ship lifted off, engines burning bright against the darkening sky, leaving Serith'va behind with the humans. Lieutenant Chen gestured toward their extraction ship. Come on, let's get her to medical before those wounds decide to start bleeding again. The human medical bay was a compact space filled with equipment that hummed and beeped in reassuring rhythms. Ethan guided Serith'va to a medical bed, finally, reluctantly, releasing her hand so he could begin a proper examination. I need to check the bandaging, make sure nothing shifted during the climb. He pulled on surgical gloves, slipping back into professional mode even as part of his brain screamed that this was anything but professional. This is going to involve touching. A lot of touching. Are you okay with that? Serith'va settled onto the bed, her silver eyes tracking his movements. I trust you. 3 words. Simple, profound, carrying the weight of everything that had changed between them. Ethan began unwrapping the field bandages he'd applied in the ruins, checking each wound site for signs of infection or reopened bleeding. His hands moved with practiced care, but he was acutely aware of every point of contact, every moment his skin touched hers. Lieutenant Chen observed from nearby, ostensibly monitoring vitals but clearly fascinated by the situation. So, she said casually, blood bond. That sounds serious. It is the most serious bond in Talarin culture, Serith'va said. It creates permanent connection between warriors. What affects one affects the other. We are responsible for each other's survival and honor. And you claimed Rivers specifically, couldn't have claimed one of your own people. I claimed the one who saved me, the one who showed me gentleness when I expected only duty, the one who, she paused, watching Ethan work, the one who made me feel safe for the first time in my life. Chen whistled softly. That's either the most romantic thing I've heard or the beginning of the galaxy's most complicated relationship. Can it be both? Ethan asked, applying fresh bandages to a wound that looked better than he'd expected. The coagulant had done its job, and Talarin healing was apparently more robust than human. In your case, definitely both. Chen checked the medical readings. Her vitals are stabilizing. Whatever you did down there, it worked. I just provided standard trauma care. Standard trauma care doesn't usually result in alien warriors claiming blood bonds, but sure, we'll go with that. Chen moved toward the exit. I need to report to command. They're going to have questions. Lots of questions. Prepare for the most awkward debriefing of your career. She left them alone in the medical bay, the door hissing shut with a finality that made the space feel suddenly intimate. Ethan continued his examination in silence, checking each wound, replacing the field dressings with proper medical bandaging. Serith'va watched him work with that intense focus that he was starting to recognize as her default state. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "When we reach the fleet, when Command learns what we have done?" "Honestly, I don't know." Ethan secured the last bandage, then pulled off his gloves. "Probably meetings, lots of meetings. Cultural sensitivity briefings. Maybe a formal inquiry into whether I violated protocols by forming this bond. Will they separate us? They can try." He sat on the edge of the medical bed, close enough that their shoulders touched. "But you claimed me as blood bond according to Talarin law, and I'm accepting that bond according to human custom. That creates a legal gray area that's going to take months to sort out." "You are accepting." She turned to face him fully. "You understand what blood bond means, the permanence, the responsibility. I understand. I care about you. I understand that what happened between us, the vulnerability, the trust, the connection, that's real and worth protecting." He took her hand again, that now familiar gesture that had become essential. "I understand that I don't want to lose this, lose you. Even though I am Talarin, even though my people will resist this bond, will call it weakness and demand I dissolve it. Especially because of that." Ethan's thumb traced patterns on her palm. "Because if your people can't see how strong you are, how brave it is to choose vulnerability over isolation, then they're the ones who are weak." Serith'va's eyes filled with moisture again, those impossible Talarin tears that she'd been conditioned never to shed. "I do not know how to be bonded to someone. I have no experience with trust, with connection. I will make mistakes. So will I. We'll figure it out together. Together." She tested the word like it was foreign, which perhaps it was in her language. "I have never done anything together before. Always alone, always isolated. This will be strange." "Strange can be good." Ethan smiled. "Humans are pretty good at strange." She laughed, a real laugh, uncertain and surprised by its own existence, but genuine. "Your species is chaos, and yours is rigid discipline. Maybe together we balance each other out. Maybe." She leaned forward slightly, her forehead coming to rest against his in a gesture that felt both alien and completely natural. "I am frightened, Ethan Rivers. Frightened of what comes next, of what my people will say, of losing this feeling of safety I have found with you. Being frightened is okay. It means you care about something enough to worry about losing it." He closed his eyes, breathing in her scent, something like ozone and metal, distinctly not human but not unpleasant. "And I'm right here with you. Whatever comes next, we face it together." They sat like that for a long moment, foreheads pressed together, hands clasped, breathing in sync. Outside the medical bay, the ship's engines hummed as they accelerated toward the fleet. Somewhere in that fleet, Command was preparing questions. The Talarin elders were deliberating the validity of Serith'va's blood bond claim. Political forces were aligning to either support or destroy what had formed between them. But in this moment, none of that mattered. All that mattered was her hand in his, her presence beside him, the knowledge that they had chosen each other despite every protocol and cultural barrier that said they shouldn't. "When the elders question my claim," Serith'va said quietly, "I will tell them the truth. That I grabbed your hand in a moment of unexpected feeling, that I have never felt safe before that moment, that you showed me vulnerability is not weakness. I will tell them all of it, regardless of consequences." What do you think they'll say? They will likely attempt to dissolve the bond, claim I was traumatized, compromised, not thinking clearly. She pulled back enough to meet his eyes. "But blood bond law is ancient and absolute. Once claimed and accepted, it cannot be broken by external force. They can disapprove, but they cannot separate us. So we're stuck with each other." Ethan grinned. "I can live with that." "You say that now. Wait until you experience a Talarin bonding ceremony. It involves ritual combat and blood oaths and a disturbing amount of formal declarations." Sounds terrifying and bureaucratic in equal measure. It is extremely Talarin. They both laughed, the sound strange and beautiful in the sterile medical bay. Two beings from completely different worlds, connected by accident and choice, and the desperate human need for something more than survival. The intercom crackled to life. Rivers, this is the bridge. ETA to fleet is 30 minutes. Command wants you and your. A pause, clearly uncertain of terminology. Your patient ready for immediate debriefing upon arrival. Acknowledged, Ethan replied. We'll be ready. He looked at Serith'va, saw the determination in her silver eyes mixed with apprehension. Ready for the most awkward debriefing of both our careers. No, but I will face it anyway. She stood, testing her mobility, and while she moved carefully, she moved well. Because the alternative is losing this bond, and I am not willing to do that. Neither am I. They made their way to the debriefing room together, still holding hands, neither willing to release the connection they'd fought so hard to establish. Officers stared as they passed, clearly confused by the sight of a human medic and a Talarin warrior in such obvious physical contact. Let them stare, Ethan thought. Let them question and judge and try to understand. Because what he and Serith'va had found in those ruins, in that moment when she'd grabbed his hand, and they'd both frozen in recognition of something neither had expected, that was real. That was worth defending against protocols and cultural barriers, and the entire political structure of two allied species. The debriefing room doors opened, revealing a table surrounded by senior officers from both human and Talarin commands. The Talarin delegation included 3 elders, their ritual scars marking them as ancient even by their species' long-lived standards. Ethan and Serith'va entered together, hands still clasped, presenting a united front against whatever judgment awaited. Combat Medic Ethan Rivers, the human commander began, his expression carefully neutral. Warrior Serith'va of the Broken Spear clan, you have been brought here to explain the nature of your connection. Specifically, the claim of blood bond that violates established protocols regarding human-Talarin interaction. Serith'va spoke first, her voice clear and unwavering. I claimed Ethan Rivers as blood bond according to the oldest laws of my people. He preserved my life when I would have fallen. He showed me safety and trust when I had experienced neither. By our own customs, this bond is valid and cannot be dissolved. One of the Talarin elders leaned forward. You claim a human as blood bond. This is unprecedented. Humans are not Talarin. They do not understand our ways, our discipline. Perhaps our ways need to be questioned, Serith'va interrupted, and gasps rippled through the Talarin delegation. I have spent my entire life following discipline that denied me every natural need for connection. It made me an effective weapon but a hollow being. In one afternoon with this human, I learned more about strength, real strength, not the illusion of invulnerability, than in 34 years of training. You speak of weakness, another elder said coldly. Of emotional dependency, I speak of completion. Serith'va's grip on Ethan's hand tightened. Of finding the part of myself that your conditioning taught me to bury and destroy. If that is weakness, then I choose weakness over the empty strength you offer. The human commander cleared his throat. Rivers, do you accept this blood bond, understanding that it creates legal and cultural obligations that extend beyond normal chain of command? Ethan looked at Serith'va, at the hope and fear and determination in her silver eyes, and knew there was only one answer he could give. I accept, he said clearly. I accept the bond, the responsibility, the complications. I accept all of it because what we've found together is worth whatever challenges come with it. This is madness, one of the human officers muttered. Bonding with an alien species we barely understand. With all due respect, Ethan said, maybe the problem isn't that we're bonding across species. Maybe the problem is that we've spent so long seeing each other as allies of convenience instead of actual people. Serith'va isn't just a Talarin warrior to me. She's a person who was hurt and afraid and needed help. And when she reached out to me, grabbed my hand in that moment of vulnerability, yeah, I could have pulled away, could have followed protocol and maintained professional distance, but I chose connection instead. I chose to see her as someone worth caring about, and I don't regret that choice for a second. Silence fell across the debriefing room. The commanders and elders exchanged glances, clearly uncertain how to proceed with a situation that had no precedent in either culture's protocols. Finally, the eldest of the Talarin delegation spoke, their voice carrying the weight of centuries. This matter requires deliberation. The bond claim will be reviewed according to ancient law. Until a decision is rendered, you will be separated. No. Serith'va's voice rang out, absolute and uncompromising. Blood bond law states clearly, once accepted, the bond cannot be broken by external force. You may deliberate, you may disapprove, but you cannot separate us. Not legally, not honorably. The elder's ears flattened. You quote our laws at us. I quote the laws you taught me to revere, then abandoned when they became inconvenient. Serith'va stood taller, ignoring the pain from her wounds. You cannot have it both ways. Either our ancient customs are sacred and binding, in which case you must respect my bond claim, or they are merely suggestions to be discarded when they don't serve your purposes, in which case your authority has no foundation. The logic was irrefutable, and from the expressions around the table everyone knew it. The human commander sighed. This is going to create complications. Life creates complications, Ethan said. We deal with them. Fine. You'll be assigned joint quarters while this situation is being resolved. But understand, both of you will be under intense scrutiny. Every interaction will be monitored, every decision questioned. The moment there's evidence this bond compromises combat effectiveness or diplomatic relations, it will be challenged. Understood, they said in unison. The debriefing continued for another hour, tedious questions about the ambush, the medical treatment, the specific moments that led to the bond claim. Ethan answered honestly, holding nothing back. So did Serith'va, her voice never wavering even when describing her moment of vulnerability, her confession of never feeling safe. When they were finally dismissed, they walked through the ship's corridors to their assigned quarters, a small space that was neither fully human nor Talarin in design, a compromise that satisfied no one but would have to suffice. The door closed behind them and they were finally, blessedly alone. Serith'va sank onto the bed with a sigh of relief mixed with exhaustion. That was more difficult than combat. Politics usually is. Ethan sat beside her, their shoulders touching. You were amazing in there. The way you challenged the elders, quoted their own laws back at them, that took guts. It took desperation. I could not let them separate us. They won't. You made sure of that. He took her hand again, that gesture that had become their anchor. We're bonded now. Officially, legally, according to both our culture's laws, whether they like it or not. And now we discover if this bond can survive scrutiny and opposition. She looked at him, vulnerability clear in her expression. I am still frightened, Ethan. So am I, but we're frightened together. He squeezed her hand gently. That's got to count for something. She leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder in a gesture of trust that she would have considered impossible days ago. Thank you. For what? For seeing me. Not as a weapon or an alien or a problem.